Welcome to hell, the devil is explaining how his torture chamber works! Yes! My arm is a cat now. The edited video on YouTube is gonna be at least 1 hour long? I hope not. I'm hoping to get it down to like 15 minutes or so. Let's take a look at this. If somebody tries to ride the donut block down into the boot, the claw will drop the boot, pick up Mario, and then the boot will end up on Mario and he'll fall into the pit. You can actually just get this boot from the side. Of course, if you don't trust the boot, we have hidden blocks just to prevent you from going back and getting it once you recognize that this setup requires it. If you don't trust the contraption, you can try to go over the top, but a switch block will go off immediately, blocking you. And at this point, if you try to use the contraption will do nothing. This is just a simple, instant switch with the mole. So the moment you pass this line, the mole will reverse direction, hit the bomb, triggering the on-off switch, and making the line of blocks solid. As for the contraption, let's get rid of the pieces that are not part of it so that it can be seen more clearly. The note block will drop a spring, which will bounce into the muncher and blow up the bomb. When the bomb blows up, it also triggers this on-off switch. Once you move to the right, the same mole trigger will switch the switch back, killing the launcher and allowing you through. When this block moves down, this spring on the conveyor moves over just enough to crush the boot so that it doesn't bounce back up. Can it crush Mario? You're saying if Mario jumps in here? I mean, that's why I put the bumper there that we deleted so that we could see this. But yes, it can in fact crush Mario. The setup for the Lightspeed launcher is a seesaw with the launcher on it on top of a ground block so that it won't lower the seesaw, and a muncher on this side on top of a red block. The launcher pressing into the ceiling, for some reason, makes it slide along at an incredible speed. This pipe leads nowhere, but then a vine comes down, and before that second vine comes down, the launcher shoots another spring, trapping you in here. There's nothing up here but some arrows showing you a door that was over there. The launcher will only ever shoot a second spring once the first one despawns, so that will only ever shoot if you pass this point. The setup for the vines coming down is switchable conveyors, which, once the switch is activated, will knock springs into shells, which will hit the blocks containing the vines. The one on the left is a slower conveyor and takes longer to trigger so that it comes down later. If somebody doesn't trust the blocks at all, they'll come here, and it'll just be like, oh, you need a fire flower, there's a muncher, go die. With a mushroom, that muncher no longer falls, and instead a vine comes down, which lets you up into this area. It's just a progressive power-up setup. If you are small, it'll hit the right note block and push the muncher down through the blue platform, and then gets crushed by this block going around so that it doesn't keep bouncing around up here. If you're big, that same block that crushes the mushroom lifts the fire flower and carries it around to the left note block. And that left note block will push down on this muncher, which will boop it over to the left, which will move this spring into this shell, and then the shell will hit the question block that has the vine in it. This thwomp here could be any big enemy, it's just to off-center the muncher here, and this cloud block is here so that the fire flower will only bounce once. This cloud keeps picking the flower up and bringing it back over. This is just so that you don't constantly get the annoying note block sound. Used a boom boom instead of a thwomp, it saves an entity. Wilfred, you're a freaking genius. This is similar to an often used trick where a switch block behind a bomb or a coin behind a bomb turning solid will immediately explode the bomb. Only in this case, it's a hidden block turning solid. As soon as this bomb blows up, it will hit this switch, dropping the launcher and locking you in. Additionally, this right wall is a scroll stop until the point when the switch is hit, and this bomb will immediately explode, breaking the scroll stop, showing you the word stay with the star and the mushroom, letting you know, hey, you weren't supposed to jump here. The extra muncher is because it actually is possible with a perfectly timed jump to make it through the note blocks as they fall.
No! Defender, I did it! I found a soft lock.
So the muncher falls down a little bit after the note blocks as a backup anti-softlock. The reason that I wanted to use the note block specifically is for the scream sound effect on them when they hit you. If you wait for the star to wear off here, when you jump back up through the saw, you'll get an awe sound effect and won't be able to enter this pipe. That brings us to checkpoint 1. And I'm sure everybody wants to know what the heck is going on in this room. But I'm not gonna tell you that yet. Stay tuned for the end of the video. The setup with the bullet bill and the large mushroom is pretty simple. All that happens is that when the room spawns in, the mushroom falls off screen and lands behind the bullet bill in a way that it's not visible. To me, the reveal feels just like a sleight of hand magic trick.
I hate you.
So let's talk about the setups in this section. And this is gonna be fun, because these setups are, well... So let's attempt to explain this. When you first enter the room, this top layer of blocks will be a complete scroll stop. The bombs will be spawned, but the blocks on tracks below the bombs will not be spawned. The moment the skewer breaks the scroll stop, and the screen scrolls down, the blocks will spawn and instantly fly into the bombs, taking out the rest of the floor. The setup with the on-off switches is really just as simple as on-off switches below the skewer. For some reason, they can stack. When entering the anti-softlock in the red state, the spring and shell, along with this muncher, will not spawn. But this upper spring and shell will spawn. They will immediately kill that wiggler and prevent it from continuing its journey on the tracks. However, in the blue state, this spring and shell will be spawn blocked. The lower spring and shell will spawn, hitting the on-off switch one more time and trapping you inside the wall if you have gone the wrong way. The muncher will spawn as well, setting off the P-switch. The coin blocks underneath the launchers are mostly to reveal the arrows behind the launchers once the P-switch goes off. There's also a Goomba with a coin behind it, which has the heavenly light sound effect on it, which highlights the P-switch door behind the launcher in the anti-softlock. You have to be completely colorblind in order to miss that P-door. You can end up anywhere in any 6 of these blocks, so I needed to make sure the wigglers consistently went through all 6 of those blocks. When the wiggler spawns and isn't killed by the shell, it will fly off the curved piece of track where it starts onto this bit of track, and fly off the end here, falling through the wall of blocks, landing on this bit of track, curving back around to the top, and falling back through the wall of blocks. It'll then end up on this bit of track, and fly off this bit of track, going through the wall of blocks again, and ending up back on the left part. As for the second set of wigglers, they spawn immediately when you come in the door. The second and third wiggler are actually on the same timing mechanism, but because one of them has a flower and one doesn't, it goes slower than the angry one. They fly through this little gap, end up on here, down here, and on this bit of track. Since the room loads in the blue state, this bit of track will actually be switched, and they will get stuck on this track until the switch is switched. So they'll be on this track. The switch will be switched once, allowing them up to here. The switch will need to be switched again to allow them onto the third splitter, and once the switch is switched the third time, they can get onto this bit of track, up to here, onto the same track as the first wiggler. Additionally, all of the things that spawn are low enough that they will not spawn when somebody goes into the hint, so that even if the game is in the blue state, someone going into the hint will not trigger that setup early and reveal the P-switch door before they have trolled themselves by trying to get to the pipe. This muncher's only purpose is to trigger the N64 anti-softlock music for both the power-up anti-softlock and the flying wigglers. When coming into the anti-softlock without first having hit the switch block from below, the first time you jump will scroll the screen up high enough that the muncher is on screen. When trying to enter the pipe after having hit the switch, the launchers will die and the muncher will fall as soon as the P-switch wears off. All of this stuff with the wigglers happens behind a horizontal screen scroll. I actually have horizontal screen scroll stops on both the left and the right of the subworld. The one block on the left is just to keep this track hidden, but on the right, I have a significant amount of space in which I do a number of shenanigans. We have a complete vertical scroll stop with a horizontal row of blocks. We also have a bomb on top of a regular block. When you come through the door, since the P-switch is on, that block will be a coin. The moment the P-switch wears off, it'll turn solid and blow up the bomb. There's just a shiny here. And you may think, well, if it's a fish, I'm ready for it, I'm just gonna go through the door. It's in fact not a fish, and in fact you can't go through the door. It's just a one-way behind the lower part of the door that lets you get to the spike to kill yourself. If a thwomp squishes a spring into a wall, the spring will shoot upwards through the thwomp when the thwomp starts to retreat. Here again, we're using the available space behind the scroll stop to set up the contraption that sets the switches in motion. As soon as you fall past this bridge, the Beetle will fall off the ceiling and begin its journey through the contraption. This one way under here is just because without it, the Beetle will hit the on-off early, and that's obviously not what we wanted to have happen there. Though the timing of the Beetle and the timing of the thwomp are not directly connected, because both of them will trigger consistently as you fall down through this gap, the timing here will always be consistent. This, of course, also uses a scroll stop to ensure that you don't see the anti-softlock until you're already being bounced into it. This bomb will blow up this block, and this bomb will blow up this block. The muncher is in place to ensure that this bomb always stays in this spot. The sound effects in this area use an interesting technique that I discovered. Normally, you cannot place a sound effect on a block which can explode, as the sound effect is typically swallowed up by the block and will trigger not when Mario passes through the space, but when the block itself is blown up. If there is a track on top of the block first, you can actually then place sound effects as normal, delete the track, and the sound effect will still be in place. This trick, as far as I know, did not work in Super Mario Maker 1. I used this trick several times in the level. As for how the contraption stops alternating eventually, it simply happens when you get high enough to despawn the shell below. This can actually occur in one of these 3 rows, so I ensure that the area blown up by the bomb includes all 3 of those rows. Setting up the contraption to actually break you out was an interesting challenge, because I had some very unique constraints. I needed whatever the setup was to not be on screen. However, In normal horizontal levels, anything that is vertically within range will spawn. But in vertical subworlds, they did not make it that anything vertically in range will spawn. They actually made it so that only around 2.5 blocks in any direction from the edge of the screen will spawn. Additionally, I needed to come up with some setup which would detect not when a switch switched, but when these switches stopped alternating. The blocks can stop switching in either state, and I had to cover both of them. Behind the horizontal scroll stop, we have a Podoboo on a track that spawns and immediately flies up and gets stuck on this track. On this side, there are actually two different contraptions here for releasing the bomb. The basic premise for both of these setups is that while the switches are alternating, the moles will not gain enough momentum to actually make it into the area where the switch block exists before it switches again and prevents them from moving. Once the alternation stops, the moles can then move. When the alternation ends in the red state, this blue block will be gone, allowing the mole to move. When the mole moves over, it will bounce the wall and immediately move backward, sending the bomb onto the note block and bouncing it up into this corridor above, where it will walk, encounter the flame that was here, and eventually fall and go off at the right height. If the alternation ends in the blue state, the lower mole will bounce on the note block, raising the muncher into the shell and spring. The spring will send the shell flying, killing the upper mole and allowing the bomb to walk onto the note block, which will bounce it up into the corridor, and it will make the same journey. This wall and bomb with the flying block are simply here to maintain the illusion of a wall on the other side for when you're in the anti-softlock. The flying block will only spawn once you come to the left. This bomb and track block here exist to preserve the horizontal screen scroll from earlier. So I have this blowing up here just so that you can continue down here from the checkpoint. The wiggler here is simply to maintain the Isle Delfino music once you come past the wall. And also just like, little wiggler buddy greeting you for checkpoint 2. I thought it was cute. The reason you can stand on this is not, as I want you to believe, because of jank Mario Maker 2 hitboxes. The reason you can stand on this is actually because there's a cloud block under there. Here again, I'm using the same trick to overlay sound effects on blocks which would normally absorb them. These sound effects play when Mario passes through them, and not when he hits the hidden blocks. One interesting thing to note about this trick is that it is actually possible to still place a sound effect on the block below the existing sound effect. Passing through the area will play one sound effect, and hitting the block will play the other. This on-off switch and these blocks are just here because, as I said, the anti-softlock that's not actually an anti-softlock right before CP2, you can actually end in the blue state, and if you do end in the blue state, I needed it to get set back to the red state. There's no special setup to the trick here. Again, simple block exploding the bomb and bouncing the boot into the claw. The only difference is that the big boot has a lower hitbox, so instead of the claw grabbing you, it sends you down under. The fireworks sound effect is a reference to my final Mario Maker 1 level. The setup for giving you the replacement boot is pretty simple. This boot will bounce around and not be caught by the conveyor until that block is blown up. The mole will turn around the moment you pass it and blow up the bomb, which will allow the boot to travel along the conveyor and fall through the one-way. If you go through here with the boot, you get blocked on the other side because there's not enough room. setup simply has the spring coming out of the pipe, being grabbed by the claw, and hitting the piranha, bouncing it over. Then we have again the same... Well, I'm bad. We have the same Jank hitbox, wink wink. If you look closely, you can actually see the cloud block that's back here for a frame or two. The Beetle blows up with yet another instant bomb setup. At the same time as you fall down this shaft and spawn the Beetle, you spawn this block, which travels up the side here and flies off here. If you don't hit the shell soon enough, and think the solution is maybe to let the Beetle walk, the block will come down and kill the Beetle, trolling you in that manner. One thing to note is that the spring which comes down to hit the Beetle in the wrong direction is actually the same spring that had been in the claw. This is the last room of the subworld, and it's the only time that this horizontal screen scroll gets broken. Unlike the previous two setups, this third one does not have a cloud block in it. And in fact, when you go for the door, your Jank hitbox no longer works. This setup, again, uses the trick with the tracks to overlay the sound effects. The door itself is actually the same door used in the skewer hint from earlier. There's also a bridge under this saw so that the claw will drop the spring and it won't block the pipe. The Thwomp Rocket is a tech that was actually discovered by someone else already. I discovered this on my own, completely independently, accidentally. It won't work when the Thwomp is on screen, but for some reason, when a Thwomp is on a seesaw and off-screen and gets hit by a note block, it continues upwards indefinitely. I have this spring on the track timed to hit this shell once you pass through these switch blocks. The intention of this section is to make the player think that they had another option before the ending ride, so that the CP1 seems more believable. Fun fact, if the player knew to expect it, and if this pipe were actually enterable, it would be possible to enter as you were traveling upward. Whew boy, how to explain this? Well, the first thing to be aware of is that the checkpoint is on top of the flag. There are only a couple of pixels where you can touch the checkpoint without touching the flagpole. Lucky for me, those happen to be where you come out of the pipe. All of the things on tracks here serve the primary purpose of preventing you from touching the flagpole when you come out of the pipe and when you spawn from the checkpoint. This block, half-centered on the curved track, will push you to the left immediately. The spring prevents you from jumping up, and the launcher continues to push you left so that you can never come back. There actually is frame-perfect cheese the first time you come out of the pipe. If you jump the frame that you exit the pipe, you actually can get in there and touch the flagpole. If this block had been a launcher, you would actually not collect the checkpoint as you came out of the pipe. That would just push you away from it, and it would not collect it. Which is why, I had to leave this uncovered for the first frame. Ordinarily, I fix all cheese in my levels, but because this one is so unlikely for somebody to find on their first playthrough, and because the troll was too good for me to scrap the entire setup, I opted not to fix it, and to simply allow the cheese to stand. This also explains the 45-second world record. The spring does two other things in this section. When it falls down here, it knocks the dry bones shell into the block, which also contains the vine that allows you to climb up between the spikes. I'm pretty proud of the timing for the vine block. When this room is spawned in the red state, which will happen anytime you come through the pipe or spawn at CP1. This shell will be here, and the spring behind it on the track will knock it into this block, containing a bomb. This spring will have already passed by this point when the bomb spawns. This was necessary to fit this track in with all of the other tracks that are going on here. When the spring returns for the second time, it will be traveling along with the vine block, which will blow up when the bomb explodes. Additionally, when this blows up, it triggers the switch block, switching the room to the blue state and allowing you to climb up through these red blocks. The setup for the fire flower is pretty simple. The bomb spawns up here, and when the switch gets switched, will fall into the gap with the switch block. When you then hit the switch for the second time, the bomb will immediately explode, knocking this coin down and releasing the fire flower from the note block. The second thing the spring does is that when you come through this door, if you stand there too long, the spring will knock you into the pig fart troll. There's also a one-way behind this door preventing you from looping back through the saw, and a hidden block preventing you from jumping up into the saw. This is to ensure that when coming through here with the fire flower, you can never lose the mushroom and still make it into the pipe. Because if you could make it into the pipe small, this would be a softlock. You may notice the hard blocks at the side of the screen, and not trust jumping up into this seeming death area with the spikes. Bombs will open the screen scroll, but it will only scroll over by one block before crushing you. Here too, I used the sound effect overlay trick. This bomb is used to open the way completely when returning to CP1. When spawning in this room, these 3 bombs will spawn. 2 of them will blow up these 2 blocks. The third one blows up these 4 blocks so that this bomb can just walk off. Without the third one, that launcher would blow up the other bomb and would show you a bit of this corridor, and I needed that not to happen. During the ending ride, this block on the track will spawn first. It falls and breaks the big bomb before the small bombs fall. I also had to play with these tracks quite a bit to get it set up that these 3 bombs will fall around you and not kill you when you are taking the ending ride. As for the ending ride itself, it will be easier to understand if we delete all of the tracks that are not involved in the setup. Each of these launchers is actually 2 launchers on different sets of tracks. They overlap and it looks like one long launcher. I could have just used the upper set of launchers. However, to hide what would happen, I made it seem as though the launchers went down farther than they actually do. The upper right launcher moves along this highest track until this point, before reversing direction. The lower right launcher moves to an identical point. Likewise with the upper and lower left launchers. The upper left launcher rides until this point, and the lower left launcher rides until this point. At this point, all 4 launchers will reverse direction. The lower launchers will fall off when they reach this point. The upper right launcher will land on this track, and then on this track. It moves up for a moment, then reverses direction, and begins taking you backwards. The lower left launcher, likewise, will fall off the track here, and get to this point, move upwards slightly for a moment, and then reverse direction. At this point, both of the launchers will be on this track, which leads all the way back to this point. They will fall off this track onto the same track as is used by the red launcher, which pushes you away from the checkpoint, to complete pushing you back into the checkpoint and giving you the goal. The red launcher is the reason that I did the back and forth with the just kidding fake out. If we took you immediately toward the checkpoint setup, this launcher would be coming toward you the other way and would just crush you. The red launcher will move along this track to this point and will fall off onto this lower track, allowing you to slide past it without it crushing you. The red launcher will stay spawned on this track and will not despawn such that it will not respawn when you get to this point. The note blocks under the door and the semi-solid behind the door are simply to ensure that the player cannot re-enter the door as they're being pushed past it when they go back and forth. I also needed a setup to prevent you from getting up into this area to escape your fate. The setup consists of two parts. This launcher, which was spawn blocked whenever we were in this room at checkpoint 1, shoots a P-switch, which will block the column next to it to the left. In order to block the column next to it to the right, I had to spawn an additional P-switch. This block needs to be blown up in order for the P-switch to bounce up. I have a spring on a track which spawns only when you're on the ending ride, which will knock this shell into this note block, which contains a winged bomb. That winged bomb will blow up the block. You also may notice that there are one-ways under here. Without those one-ways, the P-switch gets bounced off of the bomb's head and ends up under this block, and we couldn't have that. As for the bomb that blows up the J and turns the K into the R in real, this bomb will blow up by the time it reaches the J. Along with it is another bomb at the same horizontal position, which will spawn at the same time. This bomb will blow up here and knock the muncher into the P-switch, as well as set off the POW. The coin blocks down here, which form the word real, will turn into coins and be knocked down at the same time. I have a blue semi-solid behind these blocks, just so that, visually it kind of blends into the rest of the blocks and makes the rest of this stand out. The coin blocks all have mushroom stems behind them to add contrast to the letters. Positioning these mushroom stems was not particularly easy, as the game only allows you to layer 5 semi-solids on top of each other at any point. I needed to ensure that as few of these mushroom stems overlapped as possible. I made use of both the area above and the area below the corridor to position the mushroom stems, and covered the mushroom stems passing through the corridor with an additional semi-solid. Originally, I was using 3 bombs to blow up the J rather than just 1. And the radius in which they exploded included these baby sound effects in the shape of a heart, as well as the crowd laughing sound effect. I will admit, I forgot to rearrange these sound effects when I rearranged how the bombs work. And you can no longer hear the laughing sound effect, and the baby sound effects no longer make the shape of a heart. I actually did put the woozy sound effect on the top of the checkpoint, specifically so that it would at least somewhat mask the ending sound, so that maybe somebody would not realize that that was actually the goal until afterwards.
Oh! Screw you! Screw you! Oh, so... What the fuck is that?
How long did it take to make this part? Weeks. Actual weeks to make this part.